Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. Doug Maurice, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means doing rapid fire. Should be easy and breezy. We've been getting in deep on some things. Past couple pods, sometimes easy and breezy is good. We always appreciate our tech subscribers. If you want to be one, 614-350-3315. You send a text to that. You get a link back to sign up. You get a 2-week free trial. See what you think. All these rapid fire questions are from our tech subscribers. Starting, guys, with one from our friend Josh Mustachio. Is getting rid of divisions really that good for the Big Ten? That's sort of the question. Josh brings in a lot of different theories about why it might be good or might be bad. Outside of being entertaining, talk me into why it's good for the Big Ten to have the two best teams meet in the championship and not two division winners. My fear is that Penn State is 12-0, Ohio State is 10-2, Michigan is 10-2, USC is 10-2, Ohio State plays Penn State in the Big Ten championship game with the tiebreakers, then loses, is 10-3 and misses the playoff, but Michigan and USC are in at 10-2. So there's a specific okay, here's how Ohio State misses it. The real fear, I think here, Nathan, right, is are you creating a scenario where the loser of the Big Ten title game in a 12-team playoff somehow is knocked out by the fact of making a championship game and losing? Where if we were in the world we're in now, where, hey, Michigan and Penn State and Ohio State, they're all on one side. Ohio State doesn't even make the Big Ten championship game last year, yet makes the 4-team playoff. A world where, yeah, the divisions are unbalanced, but what that means is you're probably going to have a team that's going to win that's going to make the playoff. They get helped by winning. The losing team was never in the playoff mix anyway, which has been the case more often than not with the Big Ten West. Not always. Wisconsin was in the top 4 one time, undefeated one time when they went in and lost to Ohio State. And then everybody else in the other strong division doesn't have to take that loss. Of course, this is only in a 12-team world. The Big Ten does have divisions this year in 2023. We don't know for sure what they're going to do in 2024, but everybody else has gone divisionless. Pac-12 is already divisionless, Big 12, ACC, and the SEC announced that they are going to only an 8-game schedule for the conference in 2024, but they are going divisionless in 2024. So the one thing, Nathan, is everybody's going to be doing this by the time we get to the 12-team playoff. So I think you can ask the question of why is it good for the Big Ten? I think you can ask the question of why is it good for anybody? Why not still have divisions? And if one division is weaker, fine. What's Josh on to here?
Well, I understand where he's coming from. When you look at those numbers on paper, I understand why people would go there. However, and we had this discussion a little bit during the past playoff cycle, this past season, and I think it still applies here because it's a little bit like, it could be a little bit like the basketball selection process, in that I don't think they're going to hold against. In this scenario that he's talking about, you have 3 teams that are 10-2. Well, one of those teams wins enough tiebreakers to get moved into the Big Ten championship game. So presumptively, they beat one or both of those teams that they're tied at 10-2 with. And then if they lose the championship game, the committee then would be punishing them for having to play the extra game, which was actually something that proved that they were better than those other 2 teams. When you look at it from that standpoint, I don't really think that that's a big fear. I think that this scenario that he's putting out is better for the Big Ten than what you've had under the 4-team / divisional approach, where if you have a really wrong game against the wrong team in the Big Ten championship game, I'm thinking 2019 Ohio State had already beaten Wisconsin and was in position to maybe even be the number 1 seed, depending on how the Big Ten championship game went and the SEC championship game went. Well, if they slip up and lose to that Wisconsin team, which, by the way, they were losing at halftime of that game, as people probably remember, then now you have a much more precarious playoff situation. I think that's been a bigger danger, that the lesser Big Ten team that wasn't going to make the playoff knocks out the team that would have made the playoff. And now that really won't be a concern going forward.
Stephen, is there any downside? What everybody is moving to is 2 best teams in the conference championship game. Some conferences are already there. Everybody will be there by the time we get to the 12-team playoff. Is there a downside to doing that?
No, because in this world where the Big Ten is probably getting multiple teams in the playoff anyway, I more would look at it as these are the best two teams of your conference. They're not necessarily playing for playoff spots. I would assume both of those teams are playoff bound. They're playing for the bye. I think that's how we should look at conference championships going forward is the winner gets the trophy, but more importantly, they get the bye. The loser just has to play an extra game in the playoff.
Wouldn't be guaranteed to get the bye if they were the 10-2 team that beat the 12-0 team, but yes.
No, the bye.
No. The byes go to the conference champions, right?
The top 4 teams
would depend on how many
have to be conference champs. So you could be the 5th best.
Right.
Yeah. How many byes you get, of course, depends on your record, but just the fact that you do get a single bye is what the conference championship should be about at this point.
In the Big Ten, so here in the Big Ten and the SEC, I think in the 12-team world, both teams are going to be in automatically, and they're playing for the bye. And in the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC, it might be winners in, losers out. It really might be, because there's no guarantee that those conferences are going to get a second team. They might, right? If both teams are like, oh, you go in and not USC, they're going to be gone. Washington's number 3, and who's going to be left in the Pac-12? Oregon State is number 8. They're probably both in, right? They're probably Clemson's number 6 and Florida State's number 9. They're probably both in an ACC title game. It's probably not winner in, loser out. But in the Big Ten, I think it is. Josh is saying, other than entertainment, I think it's mostly entertainment. It's entertainment. It's TV money. It's so they can do the Dr. Pepper halftime thing where somebody throws a ball into a trash can, and it's for the bye. Because what I don't think, and we have to rely on the committee here, the nightmare scenario, Nathan, that Josh is outlining, I hope and pray the committee wouldn't do, as you said. That I do think, and now the thing that you are eliminating when you put in the 2 best teams is you are eliminating the, hey, we're number 14 in the country, but we got in because we won our division, and now we can win our way into the playoff. Right? Like that scenario, that if you win the West and you have a great day, if you still had divisions in a 12-team playoff, you would leave open the possibility of an upset team getting in. Now we're thinking in the SEC and Big Ten, they're both in regardless. So you're not creating the opportunity for an awesome upset that really, really matters because it's the 2 best teams. But also, you're not creating the scenario, hopefully, where some upset knocks out a deserving team because they're both going to make it no matter what. And I do think in Josh's nightmare scenario, Nathan, we would have to rely on the committee to say, listen, we're not going to penalize you for winning the tiebreaker, for beating these teams head-to-head in the regular season, creating the opportunity to lose in a conference championship game, which now knocks you out of the playoff. I think the committee has done enough where they don't only go by records. I don't think they would do what Josh is fearful of.
I mean, we've theorized about how a 3-loss Ohio State team might still be in position to make the playoff, even if it was as the 12 seed, just because they're typically going to have that level of respect. And we're assuming a 3-loss season happening because of a tough schedule or whatever, because the rest of the Big Ten got better, not because of some underlying collapse for Ohio State. So context will matter, but I think in that situation, I would rather be the 10-2 team that's going to the Big Ten championship game and maybe taking a loss than the 10-2, the third best rated or third best scheduled of those 10-2 teams. Because now when you're talking about, are you the 4th person in that pecking order, the fourth team in that tiebreaker, that might put you in a tough spot. I will say I think there are arguably some downsides to going away from divisions. I just don't think they have anything to do with the championship game. I think the chance of like losing some of the historical East rivalries, you know what I mean? Like Ohio State and Michigan State might play a lot less often in the future. Or Penn State and Michigan, will that be something that's protected, or will it become a rarer thing that Penn State and Michigan play each other? There are things like that I think you could talk yourself into the divisional format being superior. but there are enough other ways that it's been a problem for the Big Ten, and I ultimately don't think it affects. I ultimately think it is better for the championship scenario, because the best scenario for the Big Ten is to have national champions or teams that are going deep in the playoff, and whatever scenario you can set up to ensure that the best teams are in the best position to do that is ultimately better for the league.
How many teams do you give the Big Ten and the SEC annually to get in? Like, on average?
Shorthand 3. And
Okay.
SEC maybe 4.
So that's 7 spots. And then
one goes to the group of 5.
Right, group of 5 champions, that's 8. Okay. I was just
And
trying to do the math.
The 3 other conferences get at least 1.
Yeah,
so that's 11.
I was doing the math in my head of like how you only the ACC and Pac-12 only getting 1. It's like, oh, that actually very easily could happen there. But yeah, the division downside, no divisions thing, is just like the scheduling is a little less easier because there's less games that are just automatically marked down on every team's schedule.
That's true, but also the scheduling now has more flexibility, so you can start doing things like making sure every team plays home and away every 4 years with every team in the league, that sort of thing, which is something that the ADs or presidents or somebody in the Big Ten apparently values right now, and I see the point of that. So it's both sides come into play there.
And if you want to, the thing that I don't know if we've talked about it much on this podcast, if they don't do the schedules too far in advance, if they get more into like a basketball model where they have we'd like everybody to play on every campus in a 4-year period, right? That's the goal. But they're only holding themselves to that, right? And if you, like in basketball, they only announce it the year before. They're not doing it years and years ahead. You could try to make sure your best teams play each other in the regular season, which enhances their playoff resumes and makes for better TV draws. And you have your worst teams play each other, so they have a chance to beat each other up, and that makes sure that those teams are getting the 6 wins to get the bowls. I think in the Pac-12 this year, like all the good teams are playing each other. And so like, is that good? Is that bad? In a 4-team playoff world, it's a little dicey because the Pac-12, I think, might have 5 really good teams this year, and they might not get anybody in the playoff.
It happened last year
Washington and Oregon and USC.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of the time that the that the Pac-12 has not taken part in the playoff, it's because they suck.
Right.
Now it's actually because they're too good. But in the 12-team playoff world, that's not what it's going to be. It's going to be like, build up your resumes. And if it turns out that the 5 best teams all play each other, that means everybody takes a loss, but everybody gets a couple good wins. All of a sudden, okay, now you're getting 3 teams in the playoff, right? So the Big Ten could do that. Yeah, there are traditional rivalries. Ohio State and Indiana have played for a heck of a long time. If they don't play every year anymore, I don't know that anybody around Ohio State will care. And I don't know if Indiana would be like, oh, man, we love playing Ohio State. Ohio State's famous and cool and we get on TV. Or would they be like, oh, cool, we don't have to play them. Maybe we can play a different team we might actually have a chance to beat. So if that goes away in the name of a little more Indiana, Illinois, and a little more Ohio State, Minnesota, I think probably, Stephen, people are okay with that.
Competitive-wise, yeah, probably, because it's like, does Indiana care that they no longer have to pay a team they haven't beat since the 80s after anymore? Probably not. But I do think when they host Ohio State, they'll miss those because that's typically for a lot of these lower-level Big Ten teams their primetime game of the year. So, like, Indiana would love to host Ohio State because it means they might get an ESPN game at 7 o'clock.
Even more directly than that.
Well, not ESPN,
and
NBC.
And their hotel rooms.
All that's right. All that.
You looked at a hotel room in Bloomington, as
right. So like I was looking at the South Bend hotel rates, and it's basically ridiculous. But for some of these teams, that home game against Ohio State financially can do a lot for that area, so they might just be missing out on that a little bit more. TV deals might make up for that.
I wish we had somebody on this podcast who had covered a lower level team. We have Nathan. Nathan, Purdue, the Tyler Trent game excluded. The wonderful Purdue victory. What a night for Purdue in that program. And by the way, Purdue's also been very competitive against Ohio State. Go back to Ryan Kerrigan in 2009 and everything else.
And is on the schedule this year.
When a team like Purdue is playing a team like Ohio State or a team like Michigan, is the fan base more like, ugh, we're going to get beat by 40? Or are they more like, cool, we're playing a good, famous team, and we're probably going to get beat by 40? Like, do fans at lower level programs look forward to Blue Bloods or dread Blue Bloods?
think it's a great question, and I think it depends on the context of a season. Because if you have part of the time I covered Purdue was in the Darrell Hazel era when they were one of the worst programs in Power Five, and they were winning between 0 and 3 games a year, and that includes the non-conference against Indiana State or whatever. So in those years, I think it's thrown out. I don't think the fans. It's, oh well, we just lost to um, whoever last week. You're losing non-conference games to Nevada or whatever. So what chance do we possibly have to beat Ohio State or Michigan? You know what I mean? And then when you're in the better seasons, though, I think as long as you don't feel like the schedule gave you a bad draw where you had to play, for some reason you had to play Michigan, Ohio State, and only your toughest games on the road or whatever in the West, then just thinking from Purdue's perspective, I think you're going to have to go through at least one of those powers. You're not a national championship contender. So in a lot of ways, that's your chance. I mean, Ohio State or Purdue fans are going to talk about that 2018 game. And yes, the Tyler Trent stuff adds a different kind of perspective to it. But the beating Ohio State and beating them by that much at a year where Ohio State was ranked number 2 at the time, like that's something that is going to endure in that program's history kind of forever. And they know how special that is. So I don't think they ever expect it, but they know that this is kind of it's almost like the cost of doing business for them. That 9 out of 10 times you're going to take it on the chin, but then once in a while you get to be the story of college football because you pull off that upset.
So then you'd take it. Like if you said to Purdue fans, do you want to play Ohio State more or less? What would they say?
Oh, I think they would say less. I mean,
Okay.
I don't think they
Because
want
you can't
to play.
just only talk about because sometimes you might pull off a dramatic upset. Well, yeah, and most of the time you just are 30-point underdogs and you lose by 30. So if you're a 30-point underdog and you lose by 30, that's the thing that I don't know about. Like the opportunity, going into the game, hey, maybe we'll spring an upset. Like that's enough to get you through, and that you'd rather take your shot, even if 9 out of 10 times you get your butt kicked. It's still like, is it fun? And then you say, hey, remember that time we played Chase Young? That was cool. He's famous now. I remember that time I saw Nick Bosa play in person. Like that's right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think, and I think also, I mean, more to the point, then it's also, hey, remember that time Ryan Kerrigan did his thing against Ohio State, and Purdue proved it had this great player.
Let's not use Purdue, because Purdue happens to have a great upset history. Indiana hasn't beaten Ohio State since like 1988. Indiana gets their butt kicked by Ohio State every year. And Indiana plays Ohio State every year. So if you tell Indiana, Stephen, you're not playing Ohio State every year, are they going to slump their shoulders and say, oh, I look forward to the Ohio State game every season because I know I'm going to get to watch some NFL dudes? Or are they going to be like, thank God, give us a break, give them to us 5 or 6 times out of 10, not 10 out of 10 years?
I think Indiana's the perfect school for this because they suck at football just historically anyway. So yeah, I think they would be like, oh man, I looked forward to being able to watch these dudes who are going to be probably NFL players one day, and I can be able to say one day, hey, I saw them when they were in college.
So I actually think Indiana is an interesting team, but I think in this context right now they would be saying thank God, because I feel like Indiana is almost the poster child of why the divisions have been a problem for some teams in the Big Ten, maybe most specifically them, that they have to play Ohio State. So they're going to say, hey, we've played Ohio State plenty in recent history. So a team like Michigan State, I think, is an interesting example. Well, Michigan State fans feel like they're missing something now if they only play Ohio State once every 3 years or whatever going forward in the Big Ten, because when Michigan State hit its peak in recent years, going through Ohio State was part of the proving ground for that. Like they proved themselves on a national level in some ways by the success or at least the competitiveness that they had against Ohio State. And if you take that off the table, and right now they probably would want that to be taken off the table because I don't know that they're trending in the right direction in some ways. But when you hit your peaks and you don't have Ohio State to go against to prove it, does it really happen? It's like tree falling in the woods sort of thing. So that's a fan base I would be interested in how they feel about it if they're not going to have that opportunity anymore.
Ohio State 16-3 against Michigan State in the last 19. So, and it's one of those, well, it's not just Ohio State. Michigan State has to play Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State every year.
Right.
So
They're
If
definitely
they
a team
don't,
that's like, thank God they don't have to play these three teams every single year, because maybe it whatever percentage it does, it raises their percentage of a chance of getting to a Big Ten championship if every year they don't have to play the three best teams in the conference.
I do think it's possible, because I can remember this being in college at Northwestern when they were horrible, horrible, horrible at everything. Well, especially at basketball, I saw some great Big Ten basketball players come through
Mm-hmm.
Northwestern. I remember like Michael Finley at Wisconsin. I was like, oh my God. Jim Jackson at Ohio State. I was like, oh my God. I'm like 30 feet away. This guy is awesome. He's dropping 40 on my school. But I think if you're awful, it's fun to play good
Yes.
teams. I think if you're trying to be competitive and trying to get to 6-6, maybe you don't want to play them.
Well,
So I do think that's the
that
difference. But it's like, listen,
Yes.
we're gonna be
Yes.
1-11 or 3-9, or we're gonna suck
Mm-hmm.
regardless. We may as well suck against somebody interesting and famous.
Yep.
I think that's a
I
good
agree with that, because
perspective.
it's like,
Yeah.
no, I think we're going to say the same thing. Nathan, go ahead.
Well, I know. I think he makes a good point there, and I think also now that there are no divisions, that's the other thing where maybe you would have winced a little bit when you saw your schedule compared to some of the other people in the West. If we're talking about Western teams having to play these crossovers, and said, well, we think we might be better than Team B. In a given year, like Minnesota thinks it's actually better than Northwestern, but Northwestern gets this favorable schedule where they don't have to play. It could happen like you don't play Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, and the other team has to play two of them or something, and like that's ultimately helps determine who makes it to the Big Ten championship game. So this is another way where if you eliminate the divisions, that doesn't become as much of an issue going forward anymore.
So in conclusion, eliminating divisions for the Big Ten and for everybody. And I do think you have to consider what everybody else is doing, because it all affects everything for the playoff race and stuff. In a 12-team world where it's a 16-team conference, no divisions, which has not officially been announced, but is everybody's assumption. Is there any real, and again, they've got to work out the rivalries. Of course, they're going to have at least one rivalry. Ohio State, Michigan is not going anywhere. They'll probably do multiple rivalries, so probably Ohio State, Penn State's not going anywhere either. Assuming they work out the rivalries in a way that keeps everybody pretty happy, right? Is there any other downside to no divisions? I don't know that I can think of any. Assuming you protect the rivalries, and now we're playing the two best teams in the championship game, and you try to rotate through the best you can. Is there any other real downside, or is this on the whole going to be better, Stephen?
No, I think this is better for everybody. Whether you're the teams at the top who have realistic national championship aspirations, or you're the teams at the bottom where it's like you're just trying to win 7 games and get to a random bowl game.
I mean, I guess it depends on what your argument is. Someone could probably argue that if Michigan is going to win the Big Ten anyway, but that doesn't follow, because it should have been Michigan and Ohio State playing the last 2 years. But like, is there a value for the Big Ten to having teams like Purdue and Northwestern get their moment in the Big Ten championship game, even if they're going to lose? Does it end up lifting the bottom of the Big Ten? But I don't know that that's demonstrable. And I still think that now as you're moving into the 12 team, I think you want your best teams positioning themselves for deeper runs.
No, what you want is Ohio State and Michigan to play each other the last weekend of November and then turn around and play each other again 7 days later. I mean, that's TV money heaven right there.
I don't know. I mean, Wisconsin has been ranked pretty highly. You can't forget that. There have been some highly ranked, good Wisconsin teams that Ohio State has played in the Big Ten championship game. But if Ohio State in the future is getting ready to go play a Big Ten championship game against Penn State, Michigan, or USC, it is going to be unlike anything we've ever experienced. We don't know what that's like, because most of the time you go to the Big Ten championship game and the story is sort of just about Ohio State itself. Ohio State needs to do something to get where they want to go, and we're assuming they'll do it. And that's the story. Because really, as good as Wisconsin is, as high as Wisconsin is ranked, is Wisconsin really going to stand in Ohio State's way? If they're going to play coin flip games against 11-1 USC, 11-1 Penn State, 11-1 Michigan in an NFL dome at night with a packed crowd, we don't know what that's like. maybe it will be a glorified exhibition game because both teams are getting in anyway, but it might also
Well,
slap.
yeah,
It might be great.
again, I mean, depending on where those two teams are ranked at that point, you could be playing for an outcome that ranges from being the number 4 seed or higher to being an 8 seed that has to go on the road now and play somebody in the first round and not get that bye. I mean, I think there's going to be stakes, irrespective of what it means for when the Ohio State Michigan rematches. There's going to be stakes there, and I think fans are going to feel those stakes when those games come along.
No, that dangling carrot of the bye makes this that much more interesting. It takes away the even if it's like, okay, we're already in. It's like, no, it's a difference between being in and then being like kind of in. You know what I'm saying? It's like, to use the club reference again, one team is in because you're in the club. The other team is in the VIP section getting bottle service. Which do you want? That's the carrot every week during conference championship weekend that I think is going to make that weekend that much more interesting than it has been when it's been a playoff team from the East and a team from the West who's like trying to be annoying for 24 hours.
I do think probably in the end they're more playing to be like the 2 seed or the 7 seed. As we've sort of talked about on the Survivor show, the most popular 5 and 6 seeds in the 12-team playoff going forward are going to be the Big Ten and SEC title game losers.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be more often than not what happens there, unless you have like a really big upset, like Kansas State over TCU. It's like, well, TCU, and then they lost. Now TCU but more often than not, like the second best team in the Big Ten or SEC. But still, home game, you're still going to get it, but a bye is going to be valuable. Okay, so I do think the one thing is those mid-tier Western teams, Wisconsin first and foremost, Northwestern, Purdue, Iowa, that have had that carrot of, hey, you don't have to be Ohio State or Michigan, but you can win your division. That's a banner. You can hang a banner. You can have a goal. You can reach an achievement. That's going to be gone. But I don't care. Does anyone care about that? Like, other than the actual fans of those teams, is anyone like, oh, no, Brian Ferentz's Big Ten West banner. Oh, it got taken by Ohio State. Got it. It's fine. If you don't want to deal with it, then go be in the MAC. It's fine. Okay, when we come back, Larry Johnson stuff, freshman offensive lineman, eating things off the bone, and more on Buckeye Talk. Doug, Nathan, Steven. I don't know if we've done a version of this before or not. Nathan, I think maybe we have. What is the succession plan at defensive line coaching? The wide receivers had Brian Hartline at one point. The linebackers now have James Laurinaitis as a GA. What about the defensive line and potentially even the offensive line if Justin Fry leaves for Indiana soon? Do they have someone in the Woody, or do they have those potential replacements? Or do they have someone in the Woody like lined up, or have those potential replacements gone somewhere else on their way up? That's from the 310. How do you even think about something like this, Nathan? So it's nice to give people names,
right?
But what is do you have any kind of general philosophy on promoting from within at position groups like this versus bring in outsiders who did good jobs somewhere else?
I tend to be, if you're Ohio State, and I know that if you're Ohio State, you can probably get the best GAs in the country too. I get it, Keenan Bailey, etc. But I tend to be more open a search up and find the best person you can. And especially with what Ohio State spends, like it's not going to get outspent for assistant coaches at this point. Like it in 2022, it had the highest assistant coach salary pool in the country. Paid 1.9 million for Jim Knowles, which isn't the most anybody's paying for defensive coordinator, but it's dang close. They'll be able to pay whoever they want to get for these jobs. And I also wouldn't go so far as to say, I mean, the Corey Dennis thing, I don't know if that wouldn't say that was really a succession plan. Even the James Laurinaitis thing. God, why do I keep doing that? The James Laurinaitis thing is not. I wouldn't call that a succession plan because it's not like they're putting him in place to take over for Jim Knowles. It's what if they expand and now they can just elevate him into that. It's not quite the same thing. When I think of succession plan, it's like you're waiting in the wings because this guy is about to retire. And I don't really think that that's a necessary way to do this. In fact, if I was Ohio State and I had a GA who I thought was potentially a candidate for that, I would rather them go somewhere else and get on the road recruiting experience, get a different level of game planning experience and hands-on coaching experience. I don't think Ohio State. I don't think you have to worry about exposing them to the being protected and not being able to get them back. You know what I mean?
I would throw Brian Hartline. I would not call that a succession plan. I
No.
think they just it kind of happened, and he just happened to be really good at it, and so it worked out in their favor. Two, just for the sake of throwing out who the GA is right now, his name is Alan Clark. He's been a trainer for a lot of guys in the NFL right now, and he's the GA for the defensive lineman right now.
Just hired.
Just hired him this year. The old guy, I can't remember his name. I just know his nickname was Bear. Right. Three, everything Nathan just said, Ryan Day would not agree with you on the idea of going somewhere else, mainly because I asked him about that idea, and he said, why do you have to leave? And I think some of that is based in like how he got the job, right? He was a guy who was elevated into this position from another's job, so he's been a little more willing to do that in other spots, whether it be Corey Dennis, whether it be Keenan Bailey now being in that same kind of concept. So it seems like something he's a little bit more open to, at least on the offensive side. I don't know if he would do it defensively, because I don't like that's part of this year is
I think that is
more
part
open, because all the elevations have been offense and then Parker Fleming, while defensively he's constantly gone out to find other people. So that leads me to believe that whenever Larry Johnson does retire, history says it's going to be an outside hire.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but Ryan Day wasn't promoted from a GA to head coach, obviously, and he had to bounce around and pay his dues too. So, but he does value loyalty. He does value familiarity. Clearly, I think in the case of this defensive line, though, I mean, you're replacing like arguably the best guy that's done this. Certainly in modern college football, like one of the standards of being a defensive line coach, period. So the bar is going to be high, I think, to replace him. And I think you would want to bring someone in who already maybe has a little bit of that gravitas that can take that baton.
So here's the 10 Ohio State assistant coaches. 4 were promoted from within at Ohio State. Parker Fleming as a special teams coordinator, Corey Dennis at quarterbacks, Brian Hartline at receivers, and Keenan Bailey at tight ends. 5 came from other college jobs. Justin Fry came from UCLA. He had a Ryan Day connection. Jim Knowles came from Oklahoma State. He had no connection. Larry Johnson came from Penn State. He had no connection. And Larry Johnson, I think, actually left Penn State and was out there and then came to Ohio State. But it was like he was done at Penn State and he was like a huge name on the market that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
Tony Alford came from Notre Dame. He had an Urban Meyer and Earl Bruce connection, and also Tony Alford's from Ohio. And Perry Aliano came from Cincinnati, and he didn't have a connection other than that he was coaching 2 hours down the road. And then Tim Walton came from the NFL, and he's an OSU alum. So that's 3 of the 10 who are sort of complete outsiders: Knowles, Johnson, and Aliano. And I would think that the Larry Johnson hire has to be that. It has to be a guy that we don't have at the top of our list because he's just a really good coach at a really big place. Now, maybe he's from the Midwest. Maybe he coached with Jim Knowles at Duke. Maybe he, played pickup basketball with Tony Alford. I don't know. But I think it has to be a non-connections hire. Kenny Anunike is the guy that we actually wrote stories about him when he was here, like, maybe he's the next guy. And he was kind of like really into that. And then he left, and he's the defensive line coach at Fordham right now, which is good. But I mean, it's not like he's at Clemson.
Right.
Is he still there?
Yeah, he's going into his fourth
his
season.
bio's still there.
Yeah.
Okay, because
it's been a while. He's been there since April of 2020. So when he left, it was like, maybe he's leaving to get the experience so that when Larry, but I don't know that they would hire from Fordham, and maybe he's got something else ahead of him soon. Who knows? But I do think it's a reminder that UCLA, Oklahoma State, Penn State, Notre Dame, Cincinnati, and by the way, Cincinnati, when they were in the playoff, That's
with
like,
like the Thorpe Award winner and the first defensive player taken off the board. Yeah.
so it's like, oh, where do you get your coaches? It's like from that's like Oklahoma State when they were like an inch away from making the playoff. Like this is like good programs, like top 35 programs, like who are doing well. So I think the standard, Nathan, is going to be really high. And you are going to have to get somebody who is great at technique, has some gravitas, and will recruit his tail off because it is such a crucial hire. And I think they probably will wind up hiring the defensive line coach at Florida State or the defensive line coach at Kansas
Well,
State or defensive line coach at 10-win program X, where
yeah.
this dude has been a vital part of their success.
And it's hard to find a Larry Johnson out there because as you mentioned, like Larry Johnson had already established a reputation even before he got to Ohio State and then enhanced that reputation, like took it to another level. But I could see it being something like with Perry Eliano, who you're just coming off of a relatively short stretch, but Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant, and like you were kind of a hot name, and you had just helped helped a team get to the playoff. Like you were accomplishing big things in this profession, and didn't have any connection to Ohio State. You're from Texas. You don't have a connection to Ohio. It's just time for you to make that big jump in your career. I could definitely see something like that here.
It's got to be a guy where it's like the only reason this isn't what he's doing isn't more consistent is because like the level of program he's at right now. And so you're looking at him going, imagine if you gave him the resources at like this tier of a program. And that's what the idea with Perry Eliano has been, is like he did that at Cincinnati. Imagine what he should be able to do at Ohio State. Because I agree. I don't think there's not going to be a Larry Johnson who's already like that level of revered because of what he was doing at Penn State, who's just sick of being there because he wasn't really considered for the job and whatever else reasons, who's kind of already a legend and is just out there for the taking. That doesn't exist right now.
Larry Johnson came here to win a national title. When he wasn't going to be the head coach at Penn State, it's like, well, I want to be a head coach. And if not, I want to win a national title. And I did a big story on Larry when he came here and talked to a bunch of people in his family. And like, that's the driving force. Where can I go do that? And it was such fortuitous, perfect timing of Mike Vrabel has gone to the NFL. What are you going to do? Larry Johnson is available. And it's just like, nobody even had to think about it. It was like, boom, let's do this. And it's done. And you think about how integral Larry Johnson was to that very successful era of Penn State football. And now he's going to have been here for a decade. Like, it's remarkable, right? He's going to have like another whole impactful career at Ohio State. But I think you guys made this point earlier. The 4 promotions from within, the receiver thing wasn't really planned. And Hartline was forced into the job when Zach Smith got fired and then proved he could do it. So if he was overwhelmed, they would have gone out and hired some other receivers coach. But it was like, nope, he can't do it. And then it's the position that Ryan Day is an expert at, tight ends and special teams. So no offense, but you can't do that at defensive line. You can't. Especially in a world like there are teams that have a defensive tackles coach and an ends coach. There are teams like he's got like 15 dudes and there's so many different things that he is in charge of on that defensive line. And his GAs, his quality control guys are wrapped into it, man. They are right there with Larry because it's such a big group to handle. But that doesn't mean that guy should replace Larry. Not if you can get the awesome defensive line coach from TCU. You can't. That's what they're going to have to Knowles this. They're going to have to Alford this. They can't Fleming or Dennis this.
That's a good point. The amount of people just in the room, like it's special teams is what 5 people max. Tight ends is 5 people max depending on what your scheme is. Quarterbacks 3 and 4 if you're lucky, and even then it's like the position that Ryan Day is good at. Any other positions, like even running back is only 5, but it's people who touch the football. Offensive line, you've got 15 people. Wide receiver, you've got 10, 11 people. Defensive backs, you've got 8, 9 10 people per safety and cornerback. When you've got that many people, you can't have inexperience because that's too many kids to keep track of and be developing, along with all the other stuff. That's just football reasons for why you can't be that inexperienced and coach that position.
I'll give you another example. I think Mike Saline, who's the offensive line GA, many people have told me how well respected he is there by both players and the other coaches on staff. But if Justin Fry were to leave, I would be surprised if they just elevated him. And it has nothing, it's nothing against him. It's just offensive line is a huge room and you have a lot to deal with there. And I think there's probably a process by which you want to build someone towards that. Whereas opposed to Keenan Bailey, you can make him the tight ends coach. It's a smaller room. And why is he being promoted to tight ends coach? Just because they think he could be an amazing tight ends coach, or because alone, or because he has demonstrated value to what that offense does altogether, and they want to keep him as part of that.
Yeah, running a room's a thing, man. Like you got a whole bunch of dudes looking at you asking, how do I learn to play football? All right, let's do offensive line, because why wouldn't we? From the 918.
That was the first. That was the second question. Okay, I got a little nervous there.
Oh yeah, we're 20 minutes per question. We're on pace. With all this nervousness over the offensive line, I'm really taking issue with the term skill positions. When Garrett Wilson or Jackson Smith and Jigba start as freshmen or sophomores, nobody is concerned. But if Luke Montgomery wins a starting job as a true freshman, it probably means Ohio State is in a desperate mode. If the big guys up front take so long to develop and learn the position, doesn't that mean it takes more than skill than a guy learning to catch balls and run in a straight line for 4.2 seconds? So I thought this was a question about the offensive line. I think it actually might be about semantics. It's not skill position, it's strength position. It's not the reason that it takes long for offensive line to develop is not because all the things they have to learn. It's because they're high school kids and they'll get knocked on their tuchus if they don't get in the weight room and the training table for 2 years.
Yeah.
And everybody says the further you are away from the ball, the easier it is to play early. So a receiver, you've got one job: run, turn, put up your hands. And by the way, if you screw up in a lot of positions, you might cost your team points. If you screw up on the offensive line, you might cost your team the quarterback for the season. So don't be offended. It's more skillful. It is more skillful to do things that guys on the outside with the ball do. It might be more difficult to play offensive line. Strength, stamina, technique, concentration, togetherness, camaraderie, all of that stuff. So if we want to call the guys with the ball skill positions and the guys with it not with the ball difficult positions, we can do that. But don't be offended by the word skill.
Well, I think also to the point, it's when they talk about cornerbacks or receivers, and they mention, and he's also physical. It's like an addition onto the thing. Whereas when you're talking about an offensive lineman, you can't talk about all the good things about him and be like, and he's kind of starting to play more physical too. Like, no, like that has to be like the first thing. That's the foundation everything else is built on. You can't he's really smart and he knows the playbook and he can mimic like the techniques like 10 out of 10. He's like perfect at it. And like eventually we think he's going to put on some weight and play physical. Like, no, like that's it's the opposite. They're mirror images of each other. You've got to have and also it's part of a lot of it, as you alluded, Doug. It's just physically growing to the point where you can slam into a 23-year-old adult senior who might be playing defensive end or defensive tackle across from you.
Yeah, you need your offensive lineman to come in overly physical and you can reel it in and teach it how to be used the right way. If you're coming in and they're just like, they're afraid to touch anybody. It's like, that's going to be a problem. But but even the skill technique part of this, you understand. Like, let's just take Garrett Wilson and Donovan Jackson because they're both from places where you can play football year round because they're 7-on-7 and stuff. Garrett Wilson has still played much more actual wide receiver when he got here than Donovan Jackson ever played offensive line. Because take 7-on-7 for what it is, there's still an element for wide receivers of you have to be able to run a route and get open and then catch the football. Yeah, while with offensive line, I'm getting ready to start going to these camps. There's only so much you can simulate when it's not a real game. pass protection, because what are you holding on to? There's no pads. So you're trying to hold on to a guy's t-shirt who also just knows what type of move he wants to use. And so it's like hard to evaluate truly if a guy can pass protect. So there's just so much more that offensive linemen have to learn when they first get to college. While with Garrett, it was like, hey, Garrett, go do the thing that you've been doing for 4 years already, while also developing physically and maybe getting a little bit faster because you're in a real strength and conditioning program at a college level now.
So what I thought that question was when I grabbed it was, why isn't it okay for offensive line to play as freshmen if guys can play receiver as freshmen, which actually is a football question and not a adjective question. And part of that answer is part of my other answer, which is the closer you are to the ball, the more it matters. The more your quarterback's health and life is in your hands, the more it matters. And you just have to grow into it, which is why, again, Michael Jordan, whatever year it was at Ohio State, was forced into a starting role as a true freshman on the offensive line. It wasn't the plan. He held up. They said after the fact, we shouldn't have done that to him, but they had to. Like Orlando Pace could play left tackle right away, Nathan, because he was so physically developed.
Right.
And I think Michael Jordan might have been the first freshman since him to start on the offensive line for Ohio State. So. It's about extraordinary physical development. And then even if you are, because like DeJuan Jones is big, it's not just being big.
Right.
It's being like big in shape for 75 snaps. And then also having the mental acuity early on in your career to make sure that you're picking up every protection, that you're making the right reads. And it's just extraordinarily difficult to do, which is why Orlando Pace remains an absolute landmark in Ohio State history, not just that who he was and what he did, but that he did it from the moment he got on campus from both a physical and a mental standpoint. Extraordinary. But I just think it's not fair. It's completely fair to ask Garrett Wilson to get out there as a true freshman and run around. It is. So you're not putting him in a bad spot. I just think it's unfair, Nathan, in most circumstances to try to do that with the true freshman offensive lineman at a place like Ohio State, like at all.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a prodigy. Like Orlando Pace was a prodigy. Like he was the ultimate definition of like a generational talent, like multi-generational talent at this point. There's just probably never going to be another Orlando Pace. And it's not like there haven't been other years where Ohio State could have really used had an opening. Like how about this team right now? It's not like, I mean, right, the door is open for a really great true freshman to come in and get in the mix and take a spot. But we don't even know if there's even going to be any on the 2 deep this year because it's that hard. I remember sitting with Josh Myers for a story back in 2019 and talking to him about how, you come out of high school, you're a 5-star prospect, you think you're going to show up and compete for a real gig, and you're looking back on it 3 years later and you're like, that was ridiculous. Like I was nowhere, there's no possible way I was prepared. I had the red shirt, let alone like be on the 2 deep. It's insane because the physical development is so significant. And I think in the Nicholas Petit-Frere is still maybe even a better example, a guy who was so talented and still going into his second year just wasn't there physically yet. Like there's a process. It's a really interesting position that I've obviously grown in my appreciation of covering this team these last 5 years, because you do have to match so many different things together. It's like, I think even as we're talking about like the physical development here, it's not brute strength. It's like you have to have that, but then you also have to be like the smartest player on the field and have the most stamina of anyone on the field. It's a very, very, very demanding job.
I think Parrish physically could have done it if they had to do it.
Him. Yeah.
Yeah, they just didn't have to do it because Nicholas Petit-Frere was ready and Thayer Mumford was still here. I think if like Parrish is here right now, I think I would feel pretty comfortable with him starting as a true freshman. But I've had plenty of conversations with Luke Montgomery about the physical transformation he was going to just have to go through because these are kids and so they're doing other stuff. He was playing basketball. He's just living his life. So they're just, they're not college football players yet, so they're not acting like it. And then he spent his senior year going through that physical transformation legitimately. He's out of like 40, 50 pounds, and he's still nowhere near where he needs to be able to play college football at this level yet, which like helps prove the point of like this dude's had a physical transformation and he's still not close. He's still going to need another year to go through that to be ready. But I think Paris is probably the only offensive lineman who's come through here where I feel like which is why we talked about him that way.
Yeah. And Luke Montgomery, we don't talk about Luke Montgomery in this tackle situation.
Right.
For as uncertain as tackle is, and that's not about Luke Montgomery. That's about the reality of tackle play at a big time college football program. If you're not Orlando Pace or not Paris Johnson, and as we said, those guys come around like once a decade, but the typical freshman offensive lineman is just not fair to do. All right. Bone talk from the 513. Things you have to eat off the bone/core. Overrated or just a scam by the dental floss and napkin industries? Think ribs, corn on the cob, chicken wings, etc. This is Arj Sarge in the 513. So you're eating something off of something, Nathan, right? I think that is like whatever you are eating, you don't consume every part of it. What is that a great enjoyment? Corn on the cob, bone food, or is it messy and just a way to get food stuck in your teeth?
So it's funny because I worked with a guy one time who was a kind of a guy's guy. Like he was a former college football player, and he was very squeamish about like chicken off the bone. Like he would not eat it. Like he would eat like chicken breasts or I guess probably chicken nuggets or whatever, but like he's not eating a a chicken leg and just holding it and eating it. And I'm the opposite. Like I think it's underrated. I think all those foods that guy named, our texter named, are amazing. Like corn on the cob, like buttered up, salted, whatever, is amazing. Just like grilling or whatever, chicken like in of any kind, in any kind of like cuisine. You could go from like tandoori chicken in Indian to like barbecue chicken and shake and bake whatever you want to do. Like I love all that stuff and it's there are a lot of foods that when you're cooking them with the bone, there's a lot more flavor there too. Um, and nerds like me, we make stock with our leftovers from like the turkey carcass at Thanksgiving and stuff. So I'm all in on eating food off the bone.
Retweet. I come from a family of grilling. That's what we do over here. I don't eat the pork stuff anymore because I just personally don't eat pork. But everything else, yes, everything is better with a bone in it.
The flavor is better. The flavor is better. The
10
flavor
times
is better.
Yep.
10 times
Why?
better.
Because of the
I
deadness
can't tell
of
you.
the animal.
I can't tell you
gristle.
scientifically.
It's just the gristle and the grease. And
It tends to be more moist.
First of all, moist is my
Is
least
an
favorite
awful
word.
word.
In the
It's an
English
awful
language.
word. Awful word.
Moist. I don't want I just want the white meat. So like
Shocking.
all the flavor, like if you're saying like that French vanilla didn't work out as a nickname, white meat was the runner up for my nickname. Old white meat. I want all the I want the sauce flavor, but I just want it on like a grilled chicken breast and then slap the sauce on or whatever. Like you can tandoori my chicken or put barbecue sauce on it. I don't need a bone stuck through it to enjoy it, right?
It's one of those things where, I mean, the grilled chicken without the bone is probably the healthier option. It's one of those things where the less healthy the thing is, the better it tastes.
Well, I don't even know if that's true though, because like in the case, let's talk about chicken wings. Like if you're eating bone chicken wings, like real chicken wings, you're eating just the actual meat off the chicken. Whereas when you're talking about like boneless chicken wings, which I eat also and I enjoy, now you're talking about like a different food product. It's like it's processed and shaped, and it's a different situation that isn't necessarily healthier for you, frankly. So that I like both chicken wings with bones and boneless, but I've got friends who are like devotees. Like they think if you're eating boneless chicken wings, you're committing some sort of culinary sin.
Yeah, I'm more prone to eat. If I'm out at a dinner with people, I'll probably get boneless just because it's not as messy to eat in a social situation. But if I'm in my own home or around my family, we getting boneless chicken with the bone in it.
But often, do people love chicken? Like I love chicken, or really, is it about the way you season the chicken, the sauce you put on the chicken? If the chicken is primarily a way to get the sauce flavor to your mouth, then what does it matter? You can season up a grilled chicken breast, right? You can
Yeah.
put whatever sauce you want on the grilled chicken breast. So to me, like, I very much enjoy the flavor of buffalo sauce,
Hmm.
but I don't want a bone in the delivery device. I just want a slab of white meat chicken with that sauce on it. So I guess I'm not going to dispute like
So you don't like
bones add flavor, but I don't think it's worth it. It's
so just
too much of a hassle.
so just like a bucket of KFC, you don't enjoy that.
I would eat it if presented with it. I would never order it. Never would order it. I
Hmm.
would get the chicken tenders or popcorn chicken or something else there, not with a bone. I would never order a bone.
Interesting.
All right. Is it?
I'm hungry.
Is it
I
though? Is it
am also
interesting?
hungry.
Like, we should have saved this
I have-
question for last.
I have boneless breasts in the fridge right now that are probably. I've never smoked chicken. I'm thinking about smoking them this weekend.
So we are getting ready to go. It's graduation party season for
Love.
so
Missed that season. Missed
like
that time in my life.
So I don't have a graduating high school senior right now, but I have a daughter who's friends with seniors,
Mhm.
and my older daughter who's at college, they're friends still. So I'm eating canes at a graduation party tonight. I know that. Now we got to give a gift, so it's like you don't actually come out ahead because you have to give a gift to the kid. But you still, you're eating
consolation
canes.
prize.
You're eating catered
Yeah.
canes.
Yeah.
And you know what they don't have in canes? Bones.
That's what
Let's
makes
talk
them
about-
not as good as roosters.
I do love roosters, but I also get boneless wings there. Rapid fire from the 3-2-1. Much talk, appreciated, about the offensive line. Never a mention of Greg Studrawa's health issues. I believe that contributed to the drop in offensive line recruiting. Seems it is incumbent on the head coach and the recruiting staff to plug that gap. Is it all on Stud? I don't think so. Glad we said goodbye, but this is a team responsibility to adjust to whatever adverse event develops in the course of events from the 3-2-1. Nathan, I know you talked to Stud for a story around the draft. I think it is an interesting thing to bring up because there's no dispute that he had health issues. He had a back surgery like while he was still coaching at Ohio State. That's not up for dispute. Clearly that affected him. And I think it probably led to his retirement. I'll let you get there in a second. The idea of what is on the rest of the staff, the head coach, to acknowledge that, to help somebody. I thought, and I've said, that Thad Matta's health issues toward the end of his career at Ohio State clearly were catching up to him in some ways, and I thought his staff let him down. That it's like, listen, we have a good head coach. He's an established head coach. He just can't get after it on the recruiting trail like he once did. So it's either incumbent on Thad to hire better guys who are going to get after it more, or it's just incumbent on the guys who are there to kill it in recruiting. Because listen, when you come play with this guy, you'll love it, but has some physical issues. This is not that. This is an assistant, but with a specific responsibility, Nathan. What do you think of the whole idea?
And that didn't come up in my conversation with him. We have these interviews once in a while, and I won't go through the whole backstory. It just took me a while to actually get him on the phone, like track him down. And it was like the day before the story was supposed to run. And I came away from that feeling like there was like one more question I should have just asked him. Like sometimes you forget to ask like the most basic question, which is, and we talked about the recruiting shortcomings, and sometimes you just forget. I just should have asked like, well, so why'd that happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like we talked around that, but if I just asked him that, like, what would he have said? And I don't know that he would have brought up the physical stuff because guys don't necessarily like to make those excuses for themselves sometimes, especially like football guys. I agree that it definitely was a factor, but I also think it is different than the Mata thing. I think that this is just sort of the reality of this is that this isn't an office job. You've got to be able to get out and get on the road and be in a car and on planes and back and forth for long periods of time. And if your body can't do that anymore, then you retire, which is what he has done.
College football does feel like it's a young to middle-aged man's game, and it's kind of hard to keep up with that. It's I mean, he missed a game in 2021 because he had surgery on his back, I believe, in him. So it's like, if you're missing games, of course you're missing flights. of course you're not able to be as hands-on when these kids get on campus, or when you have to go on a random Thursday evening, you have to get on a flight at 7 o'clock in the evening because the next morning you just want to go see how a kid moves or how he's physically developed over the last 6 months. So it's as much you can chastise the fact that the point is he wasn't getting the job done. This is part of why he was getting the job done that makes it understandable why he wasn't getting the job done. But this is a results-based business at the end of the day. So regardless of why he was or wasn't getting the job done, it's just very clear that after a while he couldn't do it, which is why it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't call it a firing, but it was just more of both people kind of moved in different directions from each other.
Well, I imagine he didn't want to leave, but it was just a non-renewal of his contract. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it hung on forever once it became a factor, right? I don't think it was, so like, I don't know if to Ohio State's credit or whatever, they didn't say, well, this is okay. Now, it's a hard thing with recruiting because you can't just send like the assistant offensive line coach on the road in your place. Now, you can have somebody else, hey, Stud was going to go see this kid. He can't do it. Tony Alford, can you go see him? Brian Hartline, can you go see him? Like, you can do that. You pick up guys in your region. Sometimes two coaches recruit, Stephen, right? You can do that, but also
it takes away
completely. It does.
Because it's like if Brian Hartline, even that, because Hartline's seeing other people now because he's an offensive coordinator, so he's having to divvy up his time a little differently. But say Tony Alford and there's a kid in Atlanta that's an offensive lineman, and it's Tony Alford's region. Well, I'll say Florida because that's definitely his region. There's an offensive lineman in Florida where it's like Tony Alford's in on that because it's his region, but also Stud's his head coach. But Tony Alford's already seen him, and Tony Alford has a chance to go see a 5-star running back in Arizona. But he's instead having to make up for the fact that Stud can't go to Florida. Well, that might be the reason you miss out on the 5-star running back in Arizona. So it all kind of at some point it's like you can't take from here to put here because that means that person is no longer doing this thing.
It doesn't have to be a young person's game. It's an energetic game, right? Recruiting requires energy. And who's not young and has a lot of energy? Kerry Combs. So like whenever you have a thing, it's like Kerry Combs, his biological age is older than mine, but how he handles himself he's 20 years younger than me. So it's difficult. I do think it is a very good thing for the texter to bring up. And I don't know that we have brought that up while saying like, hey, man, I don't know. Hey, these tackles, we knew it was coming, whatever. It's like, well, Stud wasn't himself. So he still was being paid, but something happened. And the thing that happened eventually led to the fact that he's not here anymore. There were ramifications from it. I think the thing that's fair, Nathan, is like, let's not just leave it as like, well, guy stopped doing his job. There was he wasn't quite as good at it as he used to be. And there was a reason for that, but there were also ramifications for that. And so here we are, but it's worth mentioning for sure.
We have definitely seen, and maybe not so much in my time here at Ohio State, but maybe in your time, and it's certainly at other things I've observed where it seems like somebody just starts mailing it in. And I've never thought that was what happened with Greg Studrawa. I think there just was a dip for other reasons. And listen, we can't forget, like, as much as the tackle situation stems from his time here, they've got a 5-star guy starting at left guard that's here because of him. They've got a center who I know that Justin Fry swooped in to finish the Carson Hinsman thing, but he committed to Greg Studrawa. Matt Jones was a top 100 prospect that's here because of Greg Studrawa. So like it wasn't a complete failure. It's just magnified a little bit because of what happened here at these tackle spots.
Yep. Okay, last break. We'll finish it up next on Buckeye Talk. All right, Stephen, let's aim this one at you, a recruiting question from the 614. Jim Knowles is only doing half of a job that he's getting paid $2 million to do. You can't name a single defensive recruit that says he's coming here because of Jim Knowles. He's not recruiting, but he's getting paid to recruit and to draw up and teach schemes. Someone needs to point out that the emperor has no clothes. When Urban Meyer was here, we had great defensive recruiting. Not anymore. What do you think, Stephen?
I think I said that when he got hired, that he does go out there and recruit. It's not like he's just sitting in his office, not on planes. He does go out there and do it, but he's just not very good at it. It's not the reason he's here. He's here to fix the defense. He's not here because of his recruiting prowess. It's never been what he was great at. And I said that when he first got hired, and that's come to true today, which is why James Laurinaitis is here. Which is why they really, really are hoping that eventually this limit on assistant coaches goes away, because that helps them even more. But the impact James Laurinaitis has already had on the recruiting trail, even though he can't go anywhere, is why Peyton Pierce, top 200 recruit in the 2024 class, is committed right now. It's already started there. And, Garrett Stover would have committed here regardless, because he's an Ohio kid whose cousin is already on the team, and he was committed before James got here. But James being here offsets the fact that Jim Knowles has never been a good recruiter. He is a great schemer. So the rule eventually goes away. That's what Ohio State would love to happen. And that way, that's even more time Jim Knowles can just spend scheming, because James Laurinaitis can take up a lot of that other stuff.
It's hard because not everybody is great at everything.
Yeah.
And that means sometimes you have coaches who are great recruiters and are not great. Listen, they had a defensive coordinator before Jim Knowles who was probably the opposite. He recruited his butt off.
Easily.
I mean, and you loved him for what he did. But the thing that he wasn't as good at hurt Ohio State probably more in the end than even his unbelievable successes on the recruiting trail. Of course, we're talking about Kerry Combs. So when you're talking about a defensive coordinator and a schemer and a guy with a plan and like all the things we said, Brian Hartline doesn't have to have an offense. He's going to run the Ryan Day offense. Nathan, Jim Knowles brought a defense here. Jim Knowles came here and said, listen, I got this new position. Listen, we're going to play our coverage like this. This is how we're going to play 2 linebackers, all this kind of stuff. Adjuster. There was never an adjuster before Jim Knowles got here. Brian Hartline's not naming positions, right? So he's has an excellent reputation in that area where Ohio State was desperate for somebody really good. So if he's not as good at the other thing, you can either say, well, we're not going to hire him then. We have to recruit at Ohio State. We just need a defensive coordinator who's a better recruiter. Or you can do what they did, what Steven just said. Acknowledge, I think this is what good coaches, what good staffs do. You emphasize the strengths and you acknowledge the weaknesses and fill in around them. And so I think the James Laurinaitis hire, right? It's too late. You didn't get Tackett Curtis. Listen, man, if James Laurinaitis on staff last year, Tackett Curtis might be here. Yeah. He might start at USC this year. Louisiana linebacker who picked USC over Ohio State. And James Laurinaitis can't go out on the road, okay? But he can be that kid's best friend as soon as a kid comes on a visit.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm James Laurinaitis. You want to talk about what it's like to be a 3-time All-American? Let me show you my rings. Let me show you my NFL history. You want to go watch film? Watch how I played this play when I was here in the Michigan game. All of that. So, Nathan, I think the Laurinaitis thing is a huge part of this. I don't know, is it letting Jim Knowles off the hook? Or is it acknowledging that his value, I don't even know if it's 95% of his value is in coordinating and 5% recruiting. I think it might be 100 and 0.
Yeah, it
probably might be 100 and 0.
I don't know if it's 0, but
they were desperate for the 100.
Right.
Nathan, so are we letting him off the hook to not hold him responsible for not getting recruiting wins? Or is it just we're acknowledging reality and you'll fill in the gaps?
No, I mean, they still have to recruit linebackers, but there's a couple things at play here. Number one, is it the least important position at Ohio State right now?
It's between that and tight end, and it might, just because of what they want to do offensively, it probably is linebacker last.
Listen, it's probably the least important position in football right now.
Yeah,
right. So
I've had 1,000 conversations about the Browns, and the Browns got so bad. It was like, you know what doesn't matter anymore? Linebacker and defensive tackle. And the Browns GM was like, we're not going to have linebackers and defensive tackles. Yeah. And then last year they didn't have any, and their defense sucked. It was like, oh, well, let's not be that bad.
And that's the thing.
That's the way the game's evolved.
But even like really good linebackers end up just being edge rushers on third down anyway. I.e. Micah Parsons and, on down the list. So
yeah, it's just one of those things where it's not like he's ever going to have a big recruiting class of linebackers. So you just got to make sure. You know what I mean? Like the pressure is not as on him to really win recruiting wise. I don't really have a problem with what Ryan Day did here. I think that you know who you are when they are doing their due diligence. They learn things about Jim Knowles as a recruiter, and you can also just sort of look at what happened on paper. The one thing though that it does a lot of things keep coming back to the way that they've set up the whole defensive staff for me. This is one of those things where because you've decided to imbalance the assistant coaches and have a special teams coordinator who doesn't have a defensive background and doesn't really have any recruiting influence on any of the 11 on 11 positions, you did leave yourself a little bit vulnerable here. So if with that still out there, if they don't bring in a Laurinaitis-like presence, then maybe it does cost them at some point. It does seem like it's going to get repaired kind of by things that are a little bit out of their control, but they don't know what the timetable is on that. So it is a little bit precarious. They're in a good shape. They're in good shape right now. You've got Hicks and Powers in their second years that are the heir apparents. You think this is probably taken care of at least through next season, and maybe beyond that, you've got a stable foundation. But you're going to have to win some recruiting battles at some point. You still want that position to be recruited at the Ohio State standard to some extent. I don't think you want to, as much as I say it's maybe the least important position. I don't think you want to leave yourself with nothing there.
I think when your head coach is an offensive guy, I think if you had to choose between the Kerry Coach thing is a perfect example. If you had to choose for a defensive coordinator to be a guy who was an elite recruiter, but not a great schemer, because the defensive back recruiting was pretty good when Kerry. He fixed cornerback recruiting immediately. He went out and got J.K. Johnson, Jordan Hancock as top 100 recruits, and then found a little diamond in the rough with Denzel Burke. So fixed that pretty quickly here. So if you had to choose between that and a guy who's not a good recruiter at all and a great schemer, I think you take schemer when your head coach is an offensive guy. But it also means that the other defensive coaches better be really good recruiters, because that means they're getting the pieces. And I think they have that with Larry's history, even though he's got to prove himself a little bit in this cycle after what happened last cycle. Perry Eliano seems to be getting some things cooking there, and Tim Walton is coming off a pretty good cornerback class and might be in the midst of doing it again. But on top of that, if you're not going to be a good recruiting, you got to be that much better at the scheming. So that as long as the defense continues to trend in this direction from a scheming, on-field game plan standpoint, then you can excuse the fact that he's not as good at the player acquisition standpoint.
The texter asked it as a Knowles question, and it's not really a Knowles question. A year from now, if they have not expanded the limit on full-time assistant coaches and it remains at 10, I think it would be indefensible to have Parker Fleming as a special teams coach.
Yeah.
And no linebackers coach. It's got to be Laurinaitis for Fleming. It makes no sense, especially when you now have a guy in-house who would be ready to do it. It's the thing, Nathan, you've said a million times. It's just imbalanced. They have an offensive head coach, 5 full-time offensive assistants, 4 full-time defensive assistants, and a special teams coach. And by the way, you have a defensive coordinator who's not a good recruiter. So the idea is like, hey, Jim Knowles is not a good recruiter. I don't think that's in dispute. But that's not about Knowles. You could say right now that like Doug Lamarice isn't a very good photographer. It's like, well, I know, but please don't have me take pictures. If you're asking me to take pictures and then you're like, why are all the photos with cleveland.com stories blurry? God, I hope Doug Lamarice starts earning his keep as a photographer. It's like, I'm terrible at this.
He's not going to do
it.
But
you made me do it. And meanwhile, we have like a 3-time All-American photographer over here, but we won't hire him because we have a guy who's in charge of the pens as a full-time job. The pens guy. I can't get rid of the pens guy. So anyway, I mean, and it's not personal against Parker Fleming. It's staff imbalance, but it's exacerbated by the fact that recruiting is not his strength. And by the way, the guy who knows linebacker play, who's in the building, recruiting is one of his strengths. Because Peyton Pierce, James Laurinaitis had developed a relationship with him at Notre Dame that carried over here.
It flipped immediately as soon as he got here. It was like, oh, you're going there now? Well, so am I. And the thing is, the reason why that's true is Ohio State did not get involved with Peyton Pierce in a real way until January when it hired James Laurinaitis.
So it's just we have to be realistic here. But it's Ohio State's choosing to do this. It's not like Jim Knowles was faking them out with his great recruiting accomplishments previously. They knew what they were getting here. And by the way, what they got is what they really needed. Couple last questions. I'm not sure why my phone. Listening to the pod, I'd like to address Nathan at this point.
Uh-oh.
How can anyone be punished by the NCAA for breaking NIL rules when it would literally cripple the sport? Every SEC team is doing it to varying degrees. A lot of other places are too. Punishing these schools would literally mean everyone is bad. It's not even viable. It's from the 309. It's a discussion about like you're not supposed to do recruiting inducements. The NCAA can punish for that, but it's so prevalent. Would you blow up the whole sport? We don't need to have a huge NIL conversation, but Nathan, like that idea of theoretically they could crack down, but if they did crack down, oh my God, everybody would be penalized. I think part of your rationale, what you've explained, it's not even your rationale, it's you relaying Ohio State's rationale is, yeah, but if they do start, we think they're going to start with Ohio State, so we're going to be more careful than anybody.
Yeah. As I've said before, like you can't be a texter who thinks that Ohio State gets picked on and also want Ohio State to keep dipping its toe over the wrong side of the line. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't work out logically. And I totally understand where this texter's coming from and where other texters are coming from, and I don't necessarily disagree with their read on this. I will say a couple things. Back in March, the NCAA did. I'm reading from an article. The University of Miami reached a negotiated resolution covering alleged impermissible recruiting contact, violations of public legislation, and failure to promote an atmosphere of compliance. That had something to do with John Ruiz and the Cavender twins, the multi-talented women's basketball players that came from Fresno State to Miami. So it's not like the NCAA is not doing nothing. The NCAA is paying attention to things that are going on in NIL as related to its bylaws. And then I think it's just a matter of it's like how much risk do you want to take? Like how much risk are you, because that's always been the case to some extent. Like you could hand people money under the table in the history of college football and maybe nobody ever finds out. So is that a risk worth taking if it's getting you a great player?
Okay,
That
let's
still
answer a
exists to some
question.
extent.
Let's answer a question. Do you think the NCAA will ever have a major crackdown on a prominent school over NIL inducements? And it's just a guess, do you think that will ever happen?
Yes, I think it probably will eventually happen, but it will be more the rogue booster doing something that now the NCAA, through laws it has passed, rules it has put in place, means it can go after the schools.
I will say, Shahan and I had this conversation on the College Football Survivor show that went up a couple days ago. And it was like at the SEC meetings, they were very worried about tampering, and so, which is sort of like, hey, you have sort of a happy player on a team, and then you go in and like try to induce him to leave. And I think you could crack down. We decided that would be a very, I think, reasonable and accepted way for the NCAA to do something finally. That it's not NIL, it's tampering. It's tampering with players on current rosters. And it's not foolproof, but if you put it out there that, hey, like we are going to penalize on this, because it still happens in the NBA, Stephen, for example, but they do have rules against it, and every now and then they'll penalize people for it. And that would be a way that, like, that's not high school, because recruiting's always a little gray.
Because no one's
but
signed
I think what
anywhere
really
yet.
I think it really makes people mad. And I know, for instance, the South Carolina coach was talking about this, that they have exit interviews. You have some indication that some guys, it feels like they're going to leave. Makes sense for them, makes sense for the program, you're going to leave. And then you have other guys who are good, important players on your team. You think everything's fine, and then they leave. And it's like, what happened? And it feels like somebody got to them. And in this circumstance, the South Carolina coach, I don't know that he said it by name, but they lost 2 starters to Florida State and 1 to USC. And it's like, what's happening? I do think that, Stephen, if you said, hey, there are windows, you can't have contact with current players until they're in the portal already. And if we find out that anybody with the team, any booster, any backdoor thing, if we find out there's contact, big time penalty. I think that could work, Stephen.
Yeah, I do too, to an extent. With the NBA, it's like it's hard to prove tampering sometimes, right? Unless you're just an idiot and careless about it and leave a paper trail, which is when it usually gets defined. It's not that because everybody's doing it. It's just you did it in such an egregious way that's like, dude, come on, man. Everybody can see you're doing it. So I have a hard time seeing how they consistently apply that rule, but I do think right now that maybe there are some programs who are a little sloppy with it, where it's so egregious and so obvious you're doing it that you're giving people no choice but to punish you for it. And it might slow things down from where we have right now, where it feels like a player's in the portal and 12 hours later they know exactly where they're going. And it's like, how did you know exactly where you're going already when you just got in the portal? It's because, well, you probably talked to the program already for a couple of weeks before you made the decision to go in the portal.
I think it will be harder to do things in the high school area with NIL, right? I think it is going to be harder to prevent the recruiting inducements. But Nathan, from an Ohio State perspective, which is really what fans are worried about here, if a fan is saying, hey, how would they ever crack down on it? Why is anybody worried about it, right? Like, what are they going to do? What are you worried about getting caught for? Does it feel like maybe Ohio State early in NIL was overly cautious, and now they're just being cautious, and that like the because they are ramped up, right? They have the collectives are all doing this stuff. They feel like they've made a little bit of a plan, and I think it feels like you think, and I think I agree. Caution, given Ohio State's track history, is smart, but don't be afraid of ghosts, right? Like, don't be so petrified that you're first on the NCAA's target list that you won't do anything. And if they were that early, I think they're past that.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say it was overly cautious because the landscape was being created under their feet, under everyone's feet as it happened. Like the guidelines, the rules, the what's accepted and what's not, and what people will crack down on, like all that stuff was because of the NCAA's ambivalence towards providing oversight at times. Was kind of happening in real time, and I think it was hard to get a gauge.
I'm going to interrupt you again. They were more cautious than some SEC schools.
Yes.
We think they lost some players in the December recruiting cycle because of NIL, where other schools are more aggressive. I feel like there's almost proof's not the right word. There's a lot of talk, it feels like, around that. And so to me, that would maybe be overly cautious. Because again, I'm trying to think of the texter. Well, Bama's not getting pinched. Georgia's not getting pinched. Tennessee's not getting pinched. Texas A&M's not getting pinched. LSU's not getting pinched. Auburn's not getting pinched. They're not losing. Those teams aren't getting punished. But the result is Ohio State didn't go as far and they lost some players. I'm not expecting them in this next December to feel that way as much. So I think overly cautious is not getting multiple players you think you wanted. So whatever the line, it's like, well, what's cautious and too cautious? Overly cautious is you're losing out on guys. Not cautious enough is you got pinched. So as long as you're in between that, I think that's the right amount of caution. So it's just like trying to what's the real application of this attitude? I think that's how I would define it.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I just think there's a lot of gray area there, and we're starting to get some things that are a little bit more codified. I reported and other people did about new rules that went into effect January 1st. We're now all the way into June, and like we said, that Miami example that I put out there is one of few that's like on the books as of yet about some of the expanded ways that the NCAA could use its teeth potentially as it relates to NIL. So there may have been enough teams that knew that was coming. That was also the thing. Those rules went into effect in January. Ohio State knew they were coming months ahead of time, and I think that affected I know it did. That affected the approach that the athletic department dictated in last fall as that signing class was coming together. So again, I understand, but I understand why a fan or a coach, because they were coaches who were frustrated. I understand why they are frustrated, but I think I also understand administration stance.
But I also do think, in a world where nobody's gotten pinched yet, like too much worry about like, well, there might be NCAA rules. I mean, at some point you got to live in the real world. Like they're not punishing anybody. Yeah, maybe they will. 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 Maybe it'll be us. Maybe they will. But you haven't yet. I mean, even
Yeah.
what happened to Miami? You said that. What was the Miami thing? What was the outcome? The Cavaliers still played there, helped Miami get to the Elite Eight.
Right.
Like, what happened? What was the actual punishment? Other than like, yeah, well, what you guys did that. There was no outcome.
Is acknowledging that somebody did something wrong an actual punishment? Just if they tell you, hey, we know you did something wrong.
I don't know. Yeah. At Miami, it's not. At Miami, it is not. I guarantee that. So I do think it's possible. I do think you can be too cautious. And I love caution. Oh, I crave caution. Caution feeds my soul. And even I think maybe could be too cautious. Last two from the 412. Hurdling would-be tacklers is dangerous. Cade Stover easily could have broken his neck in the Georgia game. Why not outlaw the practice? Don't tell me that usually no one gets hurt. Usually no one gets hurt playing Russian roulette. I've thought about this. We've talked about this before. I hate hurdling. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can outlaw it because if a player is going low to tackle you, it kind of is a strategic move to try to evade a tackle. And I think if you try to outlaw it within the rules, it's like, well, what if you kind of jump over his elbow, but you didn't hurdle his whole body? Like, what is a hurdle? Steven, I would tell my players not to do it. I would, as a coach, say, we don't teach it. And if you do it, we're taking you out of the game or whatever. Like, we're going to punish you. Don't do it. I don't know that you can put it like in a rule. Could you assess a 10-yard penalty for hurdling?
Nah.
I don't know. What do you think, Steven?
I don't think it needs to be a rule that needs to be enforced that penalizes a team. But I do agree with the idea of if I was a coach, I would be teaching my players not to do that because it just doesn't – it's not fruitful enough. It's cool when you successfully pull it off, but it doesn't happen enough for you to want to do that. And it's – Najee Harris did it a lot, but that's because he was kind of an athletic freak and could get away with it. Zeke could do it, but also he was a hurdler. And his hurdles weren't like – I just jumped over a defender just standing in front of me. It was somebody diving at his feet, and he just evaded it in that sense. Trey Sermon's hurdles and then Cade Stover's hurdles, the guy was just standing there, and they just tried to jump over a 6'3" man. And it sometimes worked, and it sometimes didn't work. Yeah. I don't think that's a good idea. The hurdling when somebody dives at you, I get it. Not trying to vertically jump over somebody thinking you're going to be able to then plant your foot and then keep going because you're probably going to get hit right after you do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, has Cade Stover actually successfully hurdled someone, or does he just end up getting flipped in the air and landing on his head? And that's where this becomes an issue. I agree with you guys that I think it's probably going to have to be self-policed, program by program, more than there would be a rule about it. I think but there are some. Frankly, there are some relationships here to targeting in that you'd be passing the rule.
I knew we'd get there. I knew we would.
But I'm not wrong. Like because part
You're
of the
not wrong at all.
Because part of the point of the rule is to protect the player from themselves. So it wouldn't be about who was the one you just dropped? Steven, who the example you just mentioned.
Najee Harris.
It wouldn't really be about the Najee Harrises or whoever. It would be more about the Cade Stovers. Like, maybe we need to outlaw this because the guy is adrenaline, whatever. He's putting himself in harm's way with no real chance of success at it. But also it also feels weird to me to like make that a like. Maybe you successfully hurdle someone and now it's like a 10-yard penalty from the spot. I don't know. That seems weird to me too. I think but it might be a thing though where that doesn't come into play until we have the worst case scenario where the next guy lands on his head, leaves on a stretcher and doesn't walk again.
But I do think some of the targeting is, as much as it is about protecting the player from himself, you're protecting two people with that type of rule, right? Because you're protecting the guy who might be trying to spearhead somebody, but you're also protecting the guy who's getting spearheaded. The James Skalski situation and Justin Fields situation, that was just about as much about protecting Justin Fields' ribs as it was protecting James Skalski's head and his neck. both of those guys could have easily walked away with very serious injuries in that situation. And I mean, the Sean Wade one, whatever. But in that exact situation, two people could have walked away hurt. In a hurdling situation, that's just one person who might hurt themselves if they don't hurdle the right way. And that's if they don't get flipped on their head, or maybe they don't land the right way and so they twist an ankle or something. But that's not a two people getting hurt situation. So I don't know if you can apply a rule the same way.
Cade Stover wound up in a hospital during a playoff game. Like what greater penalty can there be than that?
Was that a hurdle?
So,
I can't remember the play. Was he trying to hurdle somebody?
Okay. This was that hurdle. Okay. That was like a attempted hurdle. So, it is, Stephen. I think you make a good point. I mean, I guess you could spike somebody in the jugular as you're trying to hurdle over him, but really it is about the player who's doing the act. We're targeting. Certainly, you are trying to make sure a guy doesn't hurt his neck, but you also are protecting the other guy too. Nathan, like you said, oh, well, what if you successfully hurdle a guy and then you run another 10 yards? It's like, well, what if you successfully trip a ball carrier and tackle him? It was successful, but you're not allowed to do it. So it's a penalty. Mm-hmm. So like, hey, you successfully hurdled the guy and then we gave you a penalty. It's like, yeah, because you did a thing you're not allowed to do.
Right.
What if you run off the sideline and tackle a guy? Well, you made the tackle. It's like, well, you're not allowed to do that. So if you just said you're not allowed to do it, you can't go over the player. But it does feel like at some point, safety first, but another judgment call, like another. Well, it was half a hurdle. Oh, was it was he 9 inches off the ground, or was he
we don't need
foot
another
and a half?
Yeah,
oh my God,
we don't need another reason why refs go to replay. We get enough of those.
If both of your feet leave the ground in attempt to go above the guy who's in front of you, I think that'll be a lot more clear cut than targeting.
I don't know.
But what if you're diving into the end zone?
Yeah.
What if you're diving over a guy in the end zone? What if you're diving over the pile?
Yeah.
What if you're what? But that's I don't.
I just don't want it.
I know what you're saying.
I don't want it.
I think some of those Trey Sermon ones, they weren't even really hurdles. They were almost like karate kicks. Like they were, you know what I mean? Like it was out of a Bruce Lee movie. So like leading with the feet, I think would be maybe one.
Leading with the feet. Penalty on the offense. Leading with the feet. 15 yards and loss of down. But I can envision already going to a replay where they're drawing a dotted line from the guy's foot up to his face mask. And like, did he lead with his foot or did he lead? Was his foot behind his face mask? I guess it's not impossible.
I can already envision the Fiesta Bowl. Travion Henderson was kicked out of the game because he tried to jump over the pile, but his foot was 1 foot in front of his body, so they called it a leaving with his feet. So now Ohio State's lost his best running back. And then they're spending the entire year talking about how the reason they lost this game is because Travion Henderson got thrown out because of a leaving the feet call.
I'm trying to think, have we asked Ryan Day this? Like, hey, do you want your guys, like, do you want them to hurdle or no? I don't know what his answer would be, because he might be like, yeah, we're trying to get them to stop, and they won't, because they're like, you're caught in the moment. You're trying to do anything you can do to help your team.
That is a good fall camp question, because it's like that's when they're probably yelling at them about doing it.
Yeah. All right, last one. I can't remember what this question is. The title: Rapid Fire. What is more scary, Angry Bama or Angry Doug? From the 615. I mean, Angry Bama is like multiple people. Like that's like 100 angry people with an angry person sort of like leading the charge.
Angry Bama won.
49-year-old guy.
Angry Bama won a Heisman Trophy, and they beat a team in the national championship by 30 points. Angry Doug has not won a trophy. He has not beaten anybody. he has not beaten anybody by 30 points.
I bet we could think of some to give him. No. I bet we could conjure some. I also think Angry Bama like influences more people. It has a greater influence. Even though we enjoy all the people who listen to this podcast and all the 14 other podcasts that you're on each week, Bama, it's like across college football, major impact.
But let me ask this. There is a clear upside to Angry Bama. Angry Bama is like, watch out. Okay, here comes Angry Bama. Is there an upside to Angry Doug? Or is it just an old man shouting at clouds?
It depends on the scenario that he shows up in. I think when we're trying to get something done, especially within the beat or within within our company, I think Angry Doug has its place where when he shows up, it's like, yeah, somebody needed to do it, so it might as well have been Doug. But then there's some other spots where it's like, just breathe, man. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's just football. It's not that serious.
I think that's right. I think if an angry person is needed, Angry Doug will be there.
Yeah.
If I'm just shouting about tight end catches,
yes,
it's like, what's happening here? So I do think there's a time and a place, but I think it's always the right time for Angry Bama, right? Although there's sometimes when it's like Nick Saban's holding up the national championship trophy and he looks pissed because they missed a day of recruiting because he had to go win the national championship game. Sometimes you think then, do you have to be so angry all the time, Nick? Do ya? All right. That'll get us through this rapid fire. Not so rapid, not so much fire. We appreciate you guys making us part of your week. Got some more pod stuff planned. And big thing ahead. Still a big thing ahead. Stay tuned to Buckeye Talk for that. For now, for Nathan Baird and Stephen Means, I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Buckeye Talk.